Welcome back and thank you for being with us once again. We're looking at the subject of falling away, the apostasy it's called. And to do that, we're going to go back to the very beginning. Because when we look at the book of Genesis, we see that God is a God of patterns. Now, if we think about patterns, we kind of know what they are. We know that when a building is made, it has plans. That's the design that the builders follow. That's the pattern. And the builder ought not to change that pattern. Even a shirt, like the one I'm wearing now, that's made by using a pattern. And I guess thousands of these are made by following that pattern. And the makers of these shirts do not change the pattern. They don't go against the pattern. Well, so too we see in the Bible, God has set patterns and He expects them to be followed. We're going to start in the book of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 1 with creation. And we're going to look first of all at the third day of creation. We read that in Genesis chapter 1 and verse 11. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on earth bearing fruit after their kind, with seed in them." And it was so. God created the plants and created how they would reproduce. And in that seed, which we use to reproduce, He had all the information that was needed for the plants to reproduce after their kind. Now, we know that now as DNA. And we go on down to day 5, and we read in verse 21 and 22. God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the water swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And He saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters in the sea, and let the birds multiply on the land." You see, they were to produce after their own kind, in the same way as the plants were to do. And we see that in nature. When a cow gives birth, it gives birth to a calf, a young cow. And all the animals and all the plants produce following the pattern that God gave it at the very beginning. And so too we see when God's dealings with mankind, He sets a pattern. We're going to go now to Genesis chapter 4 and look at the passage about Cain and Abel. And we pick up this passage in Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 to 5. "So that it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord, the fruit of the ground. Abel, on his part, brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portion. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and for his offering He had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell." Now, those of you who know the story of Cain and Abel realize that this first time we read of worship in the Bible led to the very first murder that ever took place. The reason was because Abel's sacrifice to God was pleasing, but Cain's was not. Now, just looking at this passage, it can seem a little bit confusing why this was the case. But if we go back to the book of Hebrews, we see there an explanation that the Lord has given us. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, we read, "By faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained the testimony that he was righteous, God testing about his gifts, and through faith, though he is dead, he still speaks." Now, notice this very carefully. It says, "By faith Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain." So we're told that Abel offered a better sacrifice, and it was through faith. Okay, that leads us to think, well, how did Abel get his faith? Well, it's the same all the way through the Bible. Romans 10:17 says that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Did you get that? It was through what Abel had been told that he had faith. He had been told, the word of God had told him what to sacrifice. God wanted an animal sacrifice. And over here in Genesis chapter 4, Cain gave him a sacrifice that God had not wanted. You see, God had set the pattern. He had told them it was an animal sacrifice that was required. We go on into Genesis chapter 6 now, and we read about Noah. Now we realize that in this passage that the wickedness of the world had grown exceedingly, and God had decided to destroy the earth with water. But there was one man who was faithful in the sight of God, and that was Noah. Now notice, we pick up this passage in Genesis 6, starting in verse 13 to 16. Then God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. And behold, I am about to destroy the earth. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. You shall make an ark with rooms. You shall cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its breadth, 50 cubits. Its height, 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark and finish it to a cubit from the top, and set a door of the ark in the side of it. You shall make it with a lower, second, and third decks." Now God gave Noah the pattern for the ark. He had to make it out of gopher wood. He had to make it a certain length, a width, a height. He had to make it with 3 decks, with 1 window and 1 door. He had to cover it inside and out with pitch. That was the pattern that God gave Noah. What do you suppose would have happened if Noah had decided, well, I don't want to use gopher wood, I want to use something else, another type of wood? What if he decided, no, the ark is too big, I don't want to make it that big, it's going to take me 120 years maybe to make that ark? What if he changed the pattern? Would God have been pleased with him? Would God have saved him? I put to you that no. God expects us to follow the patterns that he has given us. The falling away, the apostasy, comes about because men and women add and take away from the Bible. They change the patterns that God has given us. We're going to be continuing in this series to look at the patterns that God gives us today. He doesn't ask us to sacrifice animals today. He doesn't ask us to build arks today. But he does ask us to serve him in a specific way. And it is our responsibility to follow the pattern that we find in the Word of God. Thank you for being with us once again. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye for now.